couple of...
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the recording will be used solely for the purpose of producing a report from the discussions and from some of the presentations, and we'll be providing the slides to everybody subsequent to the meeting. So if we want to kick off, unless there's anybody else who wishes to just briefly introduce themselves, I will start things off. So there's two parts of today. The second part is going to be about two aspects. One is the upcoming health information legislation, which is we've already been notified in IPOSI of the consultation that's going to be taking place. And we're very much looking forward to that. It's long overdue, but it's happening. And the second part is around a patient and public involvement training that we have put into the IPOSI strategy for the 4-year period of it, and it's something we want to explore with industry members. Some of you will have filled out a survey before on this, but because I think it's primarily down to the fact that everybody is going to conferences and moving around finally, that we didn't get a great response. So we're actually going to be a bit bold and get people to fill out the survey while you're here during the call. But the first part of today's session is around really an update on kind of where we're at in IPOSI, and please feel free to stop me or any of the other presenters at any stage. You can see from this slide, I mean, that just gives you an idea of what our strategic objectives over the current strategy are. We have a number of priority areas and we have a number of actions under those listed in our strategy. So next slide, please. But in essence, the three kind of pillars of IPOSI are educate, involve, and impact. So what we've found is that the reason why IPOSI exists is because, and Fred Doherty will know this quite well, our founder, Michael Griffith, was Michael was a quite unique character in that he worked for 40 years in the banking sector and then retired and then started setting up charities left, right, and center. But what Michael founded IPOSI on the basis of was a think tank model, and it was a Brussels think tank called EPOSI with an E, not an I. And Michael was flying back from an EPOSI meeting in Brussels and kind of really wondering why Ireland didn't have something like that. And so he talked to Mary Harney, he talked to a lot of people, and he got initial Department of Health funding for IPOSI. And over the 15 years of existence of IPOSI, we've grown to be probably the largest network of patient groups and individual advocates, primarily because it's easy as possible for them to join. There's no fee, there's a commitment to adhere to IPOSI principles and to get involved in our actions. But I think our work at the European level primarily has led to us becoming very well known in the area of patient education, and we're broadening that out this year. We have our patient education program. We've just launched, and some of you may have seen it this week, a patient capacity building program that goes alongside that. And indeed, an awful lot of our work is around providing, I think, understandable information so that patient groups and individual advocates can actually get more involved. So the educate pillar is kind of like our foundational pillar, and Caroline Whelan will talk about that later on. The involve pillar is basically what we live and breathe. It's everything we do. It's patient and public involvement. And then the impact pillar is very much we're getting to a point where we're being able to measure our impact an awful lot better. It's quite difficult to do for any charitable organization, especially one as broad in terms of our remit. But suffice to say that we are now in a position to be able to say, well, we're only going to get involved if we can see the impact. And it's a level of maturity that's quite healthy for IPOSI. So to give you just a brief synopsis of the types of what we call spaces. So these spaces are designed to be interactive, they're designed to be patient-led, and they're designed so that patients can not only have their priorities highlighted, but that they can interact with the other stakeholders. So we've developed a number of these actions over the last number of years in our priority areas. And you know, as already been mentioned, our traditional areas were in the areas of access to innovation and maybe patient and public involvement, but the health data space is fast becoming an area of real importance for IPOSI. Next slide. So I will introduce the team members as a group rather than introducing them individually. So on the call this morning, we have a number of team members, some of whom will be speaking, some of whom won't. But I just wanted to introduce everybody to you because obviously with the pandemic, we haven't been able to get into a room between the members and the staff, and there is that disconnect. So I just want to introduce everybody and to take this opportunity to introduce the fantastic team we have in IPOSI. So first is Claire Stone. So Claire is our operations manager.
Morning, everyone.
Thanks, Claire. Second is Jen Moran, our citizens jury coordinator, and she'll be speaking very shortly. Third is Caroline Whelan, our education and training manager. Caroline is there. Next is Laura Kavanagh, our research and advocacy manager. And finally is Shannon Karpinski, our communications manager.
Morning, everyone.
So without further ado, I'll ask Jen to give us an update on probably the area that we're most concentrating on right now, and that's our citizens jury on the future use of genomics. Jen, over to you.
Thanks, Derek. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I suppose, yep, as Derek has highlighted, the area of health data has become massively important in the work we're doing. So I'm going to speak to you today about our citizens juries. As we do now, we have an ongoing, and we do have the one we completed our pilot of 2021. As a reminder, a citizens jury is the model of public deliberation. The why behind why we've chosen to use this kind of space is to obtain insight into current public attitudes and perceptions around what might be considered tricky health topics. And by providing this space for learning and information sharing, discussion and deliberation to get the public's input on what they would like to see in terms of policy options in these areas. When we met last year, we weren't in a position to be able to share with you the outcomes of the 2021 jury. It is now very much public. It is on our website. You can find the links to the full report with all the recommendations, the verdict. There was a process report. So happy reading if anybody chooses to go down that route. Since we published the report, we've had a number of engagements and looking at the impact, sort of like our phase 3 of the project, and it's been ongoing since July of last year. So we presented to Sláinte Care. This was a joint presentation between ourselves as IPOSI staff, but also the jurors. There were a delegation of jurors who presented their findings. It was their recommendations, it's their voice. We're there as support. We speak to the process more so. Again, spoke to the HRB, disseminated the information, Department of Health HSC, conducted an additional report on the patient perspective. So took a lot of the questions that were asked of the jury and asked them of the various individual patients and patient organizations. And there's a supporting report for that. We are beginning to see sort of the impact of all of this work because we're being referenced in a variety of places. We've listed a few of them here. We got referenced in the Citizens Assembly report on the Gender Equality Assembly that happened last year. And various other groups have been referencing us in their reports, all about furthering the conversation around access to health information. And in December, right there before the end of the year, we held a joint focus group with HICWA. And this was actually, they're doing a huge amount of work in the space, but it was attended by both jurors and also people who were unsuccessful in getting onto the jury. So we had asked the group, anybody who was unsuccessful was able to sign up if they were interested in future opportunities, and they consented to being contacted. And so they got to get involved in the conversation. Next slide, please. Now we are in 2022, and to understand how we got to the topic of future use of genomics for a citizens jury, it was born right out of the jury last year, where the conversation around health information, the jurors were curious to know, well, where does genomic information fit into this? And it came up time and time again, and it jumped out as it deserved its own attention, its own full jury process. And so this is what we've endeavored to do since then. As the process, I must say, the process is ongoing, as in we have a jury session this evening where they will hear from their final set of witnesses. So I will be able to share what's public at the moment, and I will do my best to answer any questions you may have. So phase one is all about setting up the process. So this is establishing a multi-stakeholder oversight panel. We use lessons learned from last year. So in this oversight panel, we have academic voices, clinical voices. We brought in legal this year, and we also have 2 jurors from the 2021 jury sitting on the oversight for the current jury, getting their input into design along the whole process. We ran a very large recruitment campaign. We received 500 expressions of interest nationally. So that was from every county in the Republic of Ireland was represented. We got really strong media coverage. I believe Shannon would be able to give you stats and figures on the fact that we actually got stronger media coverage this year than we did last year. There was a serious appetite. We were represented on national radio and newspaper, and we'd huge engagement on our social media. When selecting the jury, we use the CSO stats, and we try to make sure it's as representative of the Irish population, a cross-section of the population. This gets run through an algorithm. We set targets based on the CSO stats, and an algorithm is run by a student at Trinity College. The makeup of our 25 jurors this year was as close to the targets as was possible based on the applicants themselves. This year, a difference for us is we do have a visually impaired juror on the jury, which has opened our eyes, and we've worked very closely with this individual on making the process as accessible and ensuring their full participation. So we're learning loads as we go. In terms of people keeping their eyes on us, we had 3 unsolicited requests to address the jury, people who wanted to come in and speak to the public. And unfortunately didn't quite make it, as the oversight had to narrow it down to 9 witnesses. We have asked the jury to address 3 mission questions. They have been provided with 4 jury case studies, and these there's a lot of work goes into developing these case studies, and it's to ground the topic in reality as best as possible for the jurors, so that when they're hearing the information from the various stakeholders and perspectives, they go, oh, that might apply to Shane in case study number 4, and it just helps them to absorb the material. And we ran a full witness briefing with all the witnesses, brought them together, set out an outline for what was expected, and gave them some guidance on how to prepare. And Laura, Derek, and Rare Disease Ireland, Irish Cancer Society have penned a letter proposing that a juror from this jury join the steering group that has recently been announced on genetics and genomics. So that is an effort we are making, and we hope to see that followed through. Next slide, please. So what goes on in the actual phase 2, which is where we're at the moment, in the running of the jury? As you'll see down the left-hand side, I won't run through all of it, but you'll see the dates, the times, witnesses, the topics that are being covered. We've implemented some new pieces this year. The first one is that there was an information session, and this was, given the nature of the topic and how tricky it is, we thought it would be best to give them a starting point. So it was a real intro to terminology and concepts around genomics. The group are surveyed before they receive any information, so to sort of get their baseline knowledge, attitudes. They are polled after every witness presents, and that is, we're trying to measure sort of that change, that shift in opinion and attitude. Where they gauge their level of understanding. Are they more confused? Are they more optimistic? Are they confident we can reach a verdict when we go to deliberations on the 25th of June? What is great about the design this year is, given that we're now in we're still in the COVID world, but we're finding a way to live with it. We will actually do deliberations in person. So we are meeting on the 25th of June for 6 hours, which we are very excited about. It's a new element of the design that we have to work with, and we'll have more to share on that, I'm sure, after it actualizes. Things we've done to support the jury. Again, these are lessons we've learned, and in addition to just general new ideas, we provided an information booklet before they start. This includes the case studies, the mission, a schedule, pre-reading, and a glossary, I believe. Oh, and their code of conduct, which they have agreed themselves as they did some pre-work with our facilitator. I've mentioned the pre-jury information session. That was to just get them kick-started. We are having the processes overseen by our main facilitator, Dave Dunn, who is doing an excellent job. We are accompanied by 5 small group facilitators who go into the breakouts with the jurors to help them prepare their questions for the witnesses. The process is captured by an independent rapporteur, who is June Shannon, who would have been the author of the report from last year. IPOSI staff are acting as scribes in these breakouts, making sure we capture, consensus, dissent, anything concerns, all of that, so that we can pull it all together at the end and make sure we are as accurate in representing their voice as we can be. After each session, there are 2 witnesses present in a session. There is a summary written by June, and she provides that a couple of days afterwards, so that the jurors can go back and refresh their memories and make sure that they have all of these tools as they go into the face-to-face deliberation on the 25th of June. Next slide, please. New to this year. Sorry, thanks, Claire. You can go back one more. Things that will come further down the line are, phase 3, and which the various reports will be written. We will do our own set of analysis and our observations. We will run experience surveys, interviews with the jurors. We will work with them to select a delegation who will go forward to present at all of the engagements listed on the right, and we will provide training, media and speaking, public speaking training to the jurors, so that they feel as confident and as well equipped as possible to take their voice forward. We will be there. I will speak to this in a second, but RCSI will be running deliberative dialogues after the jury. We hope to present to National Steering Committee, Joint Committee, present to the DOH. We will be using video. We will have a videographer with us on the day on the 25th to capture, again, continuously capture the juror's voice. And this will be about their experience, about their recommendations. And we will be preparing briefing papers, toolkits, media information, and questions to be brought forward to parliamentary questions on genomics, in addition to a budget pre-submission. Next slide, please. We are in partnership with RCSI this year. We are working closely with them. So the way it's working is we're running the citizens jury, and that the time frame is January through the end of June, at which point RCSI will take the findings from the jury, the verdict, the recommendations, and they will run a set of follow-up workshops with targeted, diverse population-based groups. And this is just building to the body of evidence, building to the discussion, and we are excited to see what they do with those. Next slide, please.
Hi, thanks, Jen. Laura Kavanagh here. I'll take over for the next little bit of the presentation. So if I guess if Jen's stuff is the exciting stuff happening in IPOSI at the moment, access to innovation is kind of the long, slow slog. IPOSI has been talking about access to innovation issues since it started. And, we really bang the drum for greater access for patients to new therapies, new medicines, new medical devices, to also improve the process in terms of looking at the health technology assessment process, but also the reimbursement process, to look to best practice at the EU level and opportunities for cooperation. So, there's a lot in this space that I guess we take in. Some of you have referenced the IPOSI drug iceberg reports. And these resulted from multi-stakeholder dialogues that happened before we all entered this sort of new normal. So that would have been 2017, 18 and 19. COVID 2020 onwards became our focus, I guess, in terms of getting our vulnerable patient communities and their carers access to vaccines when we're looking at the allocation of vaccines and the scheduling, and access to new COVID treatments, you know, as we moved past vaccines or with vaccines onward into different treatments available in hospitals and in the home. So one of the first things that we did when we realized this was going to be an advocacy issue was we gathered together an informal coalition of our patient organization members. So, I mean, we had a very strong, dedicated team of people who met more or less regularly in different parts over the last 2 years to kind of guide us in terms of what were the issues coming up for them, COVID vaccine access issues and new COVID treatment issues. And we penned many letters to the Minister, to NIAC, to the HSE, to basically anyone who would listen to us to kind of advocate for greater access. And at the start, it seemed to be a little bit of a challenge. The message wasn't fully getting through and received, but if the latest booster campaign is anything to go by, they seem to now realize that it's not an age-related process, but it's really a vulnerability-related process. So it seems that the message has finally gotten through. In terms of the allocation of new COVID treatments, this is very much something for 2022. We started the year by looking at this issue and writing a letter to the Chief Clinical Officer in the HSE to encourage them to put patient representatives on different mechanisms that had been established within the HSE to look at this issue. So there's something that Joan actually sits on it as one of the patient representatives, and it's called the TIG and the TAG, the Therapeutic Implementation Group and the Therapeutic Advisory Group. And those were bodies that were looking at the new treatments that were coming in, how they should be used and who should be able to access them. And we felt that it was very important to have patient voices there, and our request was taken up. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of these mechanisms are kind of starting to wind down. It's being brought into business as usual within the HSE. So the transparency element has kind of disappeared again. So we probably have a new challenge there, and probably a new letter will be forthcoming in the second half of this year, I would imagine. We also participate in the HSE COVID network group, which is a good group for kind of getting information about what the HSE is doing COVID wise, but also sharing some of our concerns and pushing some of our advocacy issues as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so while I guess COVID has taken a lot of our attention in the access to innovation space over the last 2 years, that's not to say that the other issues that we've been dealing with since our inception have gone away, by no means at all. So really now is probably the time to kind of look again at some of the issues around access to medicines, including access to rare disease medicines. And there was a multi-stakeholder meeting recently with the Minister and officials within the Department of Health to, you know, look at the draft private members bill around rare disease medicines, to look at other issues facing the community. So I think continuing that dialogue as we move forward is an important one, and IPOSI will host a meeting of the Rare Disease Forum later this year. So I'm sure access to innovation will be on the agenda there as well. You'll all be way more familiar than I am about the Department of Health and IFA agreement around the supply and pricing of medicines. We found that that was an opportunity for us to kind of just revitalize some of our issues, probably many of which have been presented in the Drug Iceberg reports previously, but to kind of give new life to some of those issues that we're always talking about around the access to innovation space. So around the agreement, we sent in a patient perspective on different aspects, primarily around patient involvement in the process. And after the agreement was published, we also prepared a response to the agreement. In the genetics and genomics space, obviously there's a lot going on. We were thinking about this anyway because we're doing the citizens jury, but now that the HSE has actually set up a formal mechanism for advancing a strategy in this area, we are advocating for them to engage with IPOSI and our members around the topic. As Jen mentioned, we sent in a letter to the Chief Clinical Officer the other day, and we've received a response back, and we are being invited to present the findings from our citizen jury to that group as soon as they are ready, so hopefully August or September. It seems that group is working on a very tight time frame and plan to have some of their activities wrapped up certainly by the end of the summer, early autumn. So it'll be interesting to see how we can manage to kind of get these two processes to align, and how we can get our advocacy done in time to kind of feed into the process. That'll be a little bit of a challenge going forward. EU policy wise, there seems to be a lot happening. We've responded to a lot of consultations last year and this year around pediatric medicines, rare medicines, the pharmaceutical strategy, the health data space. So, we can imagine that there's only more coming in this space when we look at things like joint clinical assessments and things like that. So we're going to be keeping an eye on all of that going forward. Next slide, please. I'll move into my next sort of area here, which is the whole space of public and patient involvement. And next slide, Claire. And here, since we last met, I can tell you a little bit more about the Public and Patient Involvement Hub that we launched in October. So when we last met, we were kind of in the preparation stages. We were gathering together a number of case studies of good public and patient involvement across the health sector. So in the health services, in health policy, in health research, in health industry. And we were trying to, map out the lay of the land. It wasn't a comprehensive, it wasn't a comprehensive collection of all types of PPI happening in Ireland, but it was certainly a snapshot of what was going on. And so we launched a website with these different case studies in October of last year, and we prepared a report of the formal findings of the mapping exercise. I guess since then, what we've been working on is the partner side of the hub, gathering together profiles on our graduates from the IPOSI patient education program, which Caroline will talk to more later. So gathering their profiles together and, seeing how we're going to be able to, advertise the fact that we have this very educated, very competent community that are very interested in PPI. They really want to engage with many and different actors within the health sector. And it's just about working out how we try to facilitate the linking up of those people and some of the opportunities that exist. Many of them are already actively involved, and I think there the last point in blue on the left is that we would really like to kind of survey what their experience has been of involvement, both from the patient side, but also from the provider side, because we think there's a little bit of work to be done there, and certainly there's probably a lot of interesting stories to be told, both good practice and areas for improvement. So we kind of plan to do a little bit of that survey work in the second half of this year. And that'll feed into our PPI hub. Next slide, I think, Claire. So at the moment, we're actually really heavily focused on PPI in the health service. There seems to be a little bit of activity, and I know it kind of comes in waves in the HSE when they're looking at PPI. They seem to be on the top at the moment. Of a peak looking at PPI, and they have started a piece of work which is around preparing a PPI roadmap. Now, this was something that started before COVID. It was delayed by COVID, but I think the draft has now been finalized, and it's with the Chief Clinical Officer, kind of probably coming forward for publication shortly. Alongside the PPI roadmap, there's also an effort within the operations side of the house and the HSE to look at what co-design means, what the approach should be, and what are the different supports and structures that need to be put in place to make it a meaningful, valued, respectful approach. So IPOSI, we sit on the National Patients Forum. We're the vice chair of that forum since January of this year. And so we are really working with the different actors within the HSE to kind of make these various pieces of work as good as they can be, as robust, as transparent, as inclusive. But naturally, you can imagine it is a space for learning. There are definitely challenges. There are definitely things that need improvement, but we're really trying to sit together and answer some of the questions that are in the little bubble there on the right. What can we realistically and practically do together? You know, often we come into these spaces with very blue sky thinking, but what can we realistically and practically do? We're also trying to be very concrete. How can we map out the opportunities that exist, the ones that are there at the moment and the ones that should be there? Where are the gaps? What can we learn from others? There are certainly people out there who are doing PPI better than we are. So what can we learn from them? What can we incorporate into an Irish setting? What can we tailor to an Irish setting? And how can we design PPI that works for the patient? So this is the real important one, that we don't go and impose something from the top down, but that we really work from the bottom up with patients to co-design what they see as the PPI vision within the HSE. Now I'm talking all the time from the perspective of the health service, but I think as we look across the health sector, as we look at the research community, as we look at the innovation community, I think many of the questions that are there in the right are questions that we probably all kind of need to answer for our respective communities. So I think they're kind of useful to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So yeah, just having spoken to the access to innovation priority area and also the public and patient involvement priority area. And later on, we'll talk a little bit more about our third priority area, which kind of links in with the citizen jury, which is the health information side of the house. What can we do in these areas to kind of move things forward? And I think there are three key things. I think the first one is about capturing attitudes. IPOSI is all about speaking with the patients to kind of make sure that the patient perspective is at the heart of all decision making, all policy, all actions taken in this space. So I think one of the key things that we need to kind of always think about or identify is, do we know what the patient perspective is on issue A, B, or C? And if we do, can we check in and make sure that it's still relevant? If we don't, can we work out a way to kind of gather a group together and thrash it out? So I think that's something that we can always do together. And within IPOSI, we're willing to kind of facilitate as many opportunities for this multi-stakeholder dialogue as we can. I think the second point is about championing PPI. I think we all need to be on the same page here, calling for more patient voices to be represented at important tables where decisions are being made, be this in the health service, be this in research, be this in industry and innovation spaces. I think it's really important that whenever we see an opportunity to champion the involvement of patients or the public to a certain extent, that we should try and take it where we can. It's really something that we feel in IPOSI we're very passionate about, and we feel that it's always going to improve the process. It's never going to take away from it. We're not really scared of different perspectives here. We're very, very interested in hearing them and incorporating them and finding space for consensus. So we'd really kind of welcome people who can get behind that message and champion PPI. And I think the third thing here is that we're very much about focusing on evidence-based material, evidence-based approaches. We find that when we go into a room, when you're prepared with, good practice, lessons learned, should we say, when you're prepared with survey material, when you're prepared with different patient stories and real lived experience, so to say, that we find that it's easier to often make these advocacy requests. So we'd really be calling for others to kind of use any of the information, any of the evidence that we are able to generate from our patient organization members to make the case for our advocacy goals in the different priority areas. So access to innovation, health information, and PPI. So I think that's the last slide, Claire, from my side of things. I might leave it there and pass over to Caroline. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Good morning. I'm going to actually keep my video switched off just to make sure that my signal stays strong. So it's lovely to see you all again a year later. Next slide, please. And I'm going to try and keep on track with time, following the good example of my colleagues. Just for those of you who are maybe new to the table and didn't join us this time last year, so patient and public involvement is gaining momentum in Ireland. And I hear this all the time. I mean, I came in as an outsider to IPOSI, but I've heard that it's not just comparing how things were a decade ago or even 5 years ago, but it's really changing and becoming increasingly important and changing in a positive way year on year. And I guess my big interest is the impact of patient education. And this is very much induced by IPOSI, but also EUPATI, which I'll go into later. And we see evidence from the graduates. We're now at over 60 from 3 editions of the IPOSI course, and we have over a dozen EUPATI fellows in Ireland. And they are working effectively with partners and agencies and different authorities. Just to give you just to give you a very practical example, I support the IPOSI matchmaking between patient advocates and PPI opportunities. So we really have very good insight into the impact that patient education is having on patient advocates. Something that Derek is very passionate about, and also I could mention Jason Last, another board member, is the idea of IPOSI graduates moving from educated patients to being educators and mentors. And I hope maybe later on in the discussion, Derek will find time to give you a few words on that. But just to give you again 2 very practical examples that are really something we do now very automatically. In the patient education program, one of the great successes of the most recent edition is the role of the peer mentors who are ex-graduates, patient advocates, helping us basically teach the new students. Another lovely example that's becoming increasingly popular is the Patient Dragon's Den. Derek has run this, I think, 2 or 3 times now with University of Limerick, and was this year approached by RCSI to do something similar. Next slide, please. So an absolute core of patient education, of course, is the IPOSI patient education program. It's now going into its 4th edition. It was run as a pilot in 2017, and it was basically a kind of a take on the EUPATI course, which has been running for a little bit longer, but really redeveloped and put in the Irish context. So we have 3 modules, one on clinical trials, one on regulatory affairs, and then HTA. These are each 10-week modules. We run the course in its last edition from January until November. We give them a break during the summer, and we have to acknowledge a very positive partnership with UCD, with Trinity, the HPRA, and NCP. As I said, it's 11 months. We were thrown into a completely e-learning format in 2021. And we also try as much as we can to, a huge part of it is not just the learning of the content, but also the networking and the peer-to-peer relationships that are built up between the students who become graduates. Now, what has been our focus this year? We had the graduation of the 2021 program in March. And so this year is kind of a year off from running the full program. We've been looking at redefining the content. So just to give you an example, compared to the 2017-2019 editions, 2021 had an extra 2 to 3 week section added in the regulatory affairs, focusing on medical devices. So with our partners, we're continuously looking to enhance the material, update the material, and so on. We're also looking at developing new topics. One which we're working on with a content committee at the moment is research ethics in Ireland. We're partnering with RCSI on this. And also, of course, new approaches, given that we're in this kind of pseudo post-COVID world. We would hope to return to some face-to-face aspect in the course, but we have to acknowledge the fact that going to completely e-learning is a great equalizer in terms of reaching out to patients all over the country, and carers, of course, who have a lot of other pulls on their time and their energy and so on. So we're going to profit from that and go towards a truly hybrid approach in 2023. Who do we work with? Well, obviously we take a lead from the IPOSI Education and Training Advisory Board. This is comprising patient advocates, academia, and also industry. Also, obviously, our academic and regulatory affairs partners. We also learn from projects we're involved in, just to mention two, because there are many, is the Chameleons and PPI Ignite. PPI Ignite, of course, working very much in terms of the research environment in PPI. And then, of course, our relationship with UPATI over the past 10 years, the fellows that are coming out of the UPATI course, our graduates, as I said, have a very big impact on our program going forward as peer mentors, as advisors, the Irish ENP and others. I just want to give a shout out just that you are alerted to the fact that we'll open for applications for the next full program of the patient education program for next year. We'll open for applications in autumn 2022. So you'll see that in our social media announcements, in our newsletter and so on. Next slide, please. So we're very excited to announce a new program which we're running. This, I think, was released to the public yesterday. Shannon will correct me if I'm wrong. And this is a patient capacity building program, which we started as a pilot 18 months ago. This really came from discussions that were in the ENP. We started with some social media trainings, and this has now developed into a full program, which we're running in terms of 4 trainings per year. If we can increase this, if there's the appetite for that, we certainly will. And we look at them in terms of technical workshop topics and substantive workshop topics. To give you an example, the pilot workshop or trainings were on social media, so Twitter and LinkedIn, Facebook for not-for-profit. And now, for example, just next Monday, just in case you have patient advocates who would be interested, we're kind of pulling that together and running an e-advocacy training, creating an effective strategy for social media campaigns. We also did a very interesting one, which on the communications for political and public affairs. In February, we had a basic podcasting training, and there was appetite within that group for us to arrange for September and more intermediate podcast training. In terms of the substantive workshop topics, we're working with one of our educational partners, the NCP, to try and put together a workshop on patient submission. So hoping to announce that in the autumn. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned a few times the ENP, just for those of you who are new to the table again. So UPATI is the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, and it started off in 2012 as a public-private partnership. It's now a not-for-profit foundation based in the Netherlands. And yeah, they're very much all about patient education. So I'd invite you to investigate them further on their website. And as a result of that, I can't go into too much detail, but there are basically UPATI national platforms now formed all over the world. I think we're up to about 23, and Ireland has one of these platforms, and that's a bringing together of patients, academia and industry. At the moment, we have 70 members. We meet about every 2 months. Sometimes it's us bringing information to the table. For example, the April meeting on Zoom, we organized an information session by UPATI explaining all of the kind of offerings that they have. Whereas we had a meeting on Monday, which was chaired by Laura and Derek, and it was a very interesting discussion around the Ukrainian refugee situation, patients and carers. Of the 50 members, obviously a very strong component are 50 graduates from the 3 editions of the IPOSI patient education program. And this is really a growing community. I would encourage you to join if you haven't already done so. And I don't think I have to spend too much time on the PPI Hub, but obviously this is where there's a very strong link between myself and Laura, in that a lot of the members of the ENP are bringing the cases to the PPI Hub. You'll see a lot of their profiles there that you can partner with and so on. And maybe just a final word that, this is where the matchmaking would probably go to, the next level. At the moment, it's done manually, and the PPI Hub in future could be something that we can do in terms of hosting the matchmaking. Next slide, please. I think it's my last one. Yeah, so really what I wanted to end with is, again, on that note of what we can do together, I'd encourage you to join the EUPATI National Platform. It's really, you can come join a meeting when you want. People pop in and out of the discussion all the time. Engage with the matchmaking. I have to say, and I manage about 12 to 20 opportunities per year. It's actually rapidly increasing, but I haven't yet had a matchmaking opportunity between industry and our patient advocates. And finally, in terms of the patient education, you now see that we have two offerings. We have the full patient education program. We'd like to see applications coming to us through you in the autumn, but also we have this capacity building program. And just to say that that's not limited to our patient members. So just to give you an idea, at the training on Monday, 75% are from the ENP and from IPOSI membership, and then 6 are from a public call that we've offered free access to other patient advocates that mightn't necessarily be members. So that's it for me. Thank you for your attention, and I think we'll have time for discussion later.
Thanks, Caroline. I don't know if Derek is still with us, but if you are, Derek, feel free to come in. Otherwise, I think we have a little bit of time between now and the break. We can maybe take the slides down for a little bit and see everyone's faces if we're all still there. And anyone who'd like to ask a question to myself or any of the other staff members is more than free to do so. So to say, just raise your hands. Okay, I can see the hands going up. That's great. Hi, Daphne. Michelle, you're first on my screen there.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I just have a question for Caroline there, just on the PPI Hub and the matchmaking. It sounds really interesting because it is something, we struggle with, is finding PPI contributors to contribute to various things that we have going on. So I'm just interested to know, is there a process around, if we have opportunities, what is that process? Because we would really be interested in perhaps putting up opportunities in the near future. Thanks.
Super, Michelle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, happy to take that. So yeah, we have the matchmaking has been running informally from as far back as 2018, and I guess we kind of formalized the whole thing about 2 years ago now. So people can contact either info@IPOSI or they can contact me directly. We have a short, I think it's about a 2-pager policy. It's just a small template, basically setting out what is the opportunity, what's expected from the patient. We call it an expression of interest. Then I send that out for you, and I gather expressions of interest, make sure that everything is in order, collate them for you, and return them for you to select your best candidate or best candidates. It's really straightforward. Of course, it's manual at the moment, so we're hoping maybe to make it more on a kind of website based. But yeah, it's very straightforward.
And I think one of the things to say here, you haven't heard from Shannon, our comms manager, but she's like a swan paddling away frantically in the background on a number of different projects. And one of the projects is a new website for IPOSI. And so on that website, we're going to work out a way to kind of put some of the process that Caroline has mentioned to you there orally down on paper, so that people can kind of get a little bit more familiar with it and start to use it with a bit more frequency.
Brilliant.
Certainly, we'd love to see people coming with opportunities from industry, because it's definitely been our observation from the mapping report and from the PPI case studies that there is a little bit of a lag, and we know the challenges. Like, we know that a lot of the PPI work happens at the global and headquarters and international levels, and then it's hard to sometimes kind of work out where the entry points might be at the national level. But it's something that we would like to kind of explore a little bit more. If there are any entry points that we're not taking full advantage of at the moment, could we do so? And if we can make the process of identifying patients a little bit easier and the connection with those patients a little bit easier, we'd be really happy to try and facilitate that as well. So there will be more coming. It's kind of a watch this space, and it'll be on the website. And in the meantime, Caroline can help
Great, thanks.
provide any information.
Yeah, we'll be in contact, Caroline. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to come to you, Joan, in a minute, but I think, Daphne, did you have your hand up and it's gone down?
Yeah, I did, and I think it was
Nice to see you again.
Hi, Laura. It was really
Hi.
nice. Thanks for really good presentation, really informative, actually. And yeah, I think my question was answered by the previous one as well. So, Caroline, it would be great to get that information about how, because we do have opportunities, and we'll be keen, especially in the rare disease space as well, where there might not be established patient groups. I think even then, opportunities like this would be really helpful for kind of highlighting areas for engagement. So really would appreciate getting that template, even if it's manually filling out now. So, but it's great to see that, and yeah, it would be great to be part of it as well. Thank you.
And Daphne, you'll know from your work with EUPATI, the European project, Patient Academy, you know, they've kind of got a matchmaking tool now up and running, EUPATI Connect. So we're kind of waiting to see how that's working out and how we can kind of tailor it to the Irish system as well. But we'll definitely put that information up as soon as we can. And I think our involvement in things like the HSE Patient Forum and things like that, it's kind of broadening our network even further beyond the education program. So we've got a lot of patient contacts now who are really enthusiastic about PPI. So we want to get them connected. That's great. Yeah. Great. Joan.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that one of the things that may be the reason why the industry hasn't looked for matchmaking yet is probably because they're approaching directly the patient organizations. I know we would get a lot of direct requests. However, one of the things that I found post-COVID, particularly in the COPD population, is that they have serious COVID burnout. They don't want to participate at the moment. So if we're getting these sort of, requests for PPI, it's great to know that the APOSI matchmaking service is there. If we can't fill that void, perhaps you have somebody who's not connected with us that might be interested. So that's really helpful to know. And I suppose the other thing is, I wonder if it's something that I obviously do advocacy work as part of COPD Support Ireland, but also in my role as a parent of a child with a rare disease. So if there was an opportunity for individuals to register on your hub to say, I'm interested and these are my areas of interest and experience, that would be a really valuable thing. That's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I think APOSI could definitely fill that gap. That would be amazing. So it was just a comment on it.
No, and it's really interesting that you mention it, because that was kind of floated out there, so to say, in our original design for the PPI hub, and then we just realized that might open the floodgates and that we had to think about it a little bit more carefully. But it's still on there, and I think it will be sorted and solved. Because there's certainly lots of people who want to put their hands up, and we do need to refresh the community, and we do need to diversify the community, because there's a lot of the same voices over and over again, and that's why there is burnout. So it's really important for us to kind of play that role. And I think to your first point, letting patient organization members know that that potential exists for us to step in whenever there's a little bit of a challenge is also something worth exploring. Thanks, Joan. Any other hands up? Anyone have any comments around our priority areas, our access to innovation side of things? We'll talk more about health information after the break, but.
Sorry, just a quick question on the PPI. So when you're doing matchmaking, do you go through the other patient organizations, or is it just the individual patients that you have connections to?
Caroline, you can clarify if I get wrong, but at the moment it's, yeah.
Yeah, we send it to the patient members. Some of them are individuals and some of them are belonging to organizations within the
Okay.
ENP. Yeah, so it's that
Okay.
limited group of 70 members of that group. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
And I think one of the challenges at the moment, and it speaks to Joan's point around the burnout, is that there seems to be a lot more PPI activity within the health system at the moment. There's a lot of requests coming through from the HSE now. Some of them of better quality than others, but there seems to be a bit of a push at the moment, at least on paper, for them to put PPI reps in various different working groups and committees and panels and things like that. So there are, Caroline will testify, an increasing number of opportunities coming through from that side of things. So we also have a bit of a balancing act to do, maybe as we move forward in terms of supporting the different sections of the health sector. Any other comments or requests? Just anything general on IPOSI's work at all in relation to our priority areas are welcome, not wedded to the slides, so to say, or whatever.
Hi, Laura. Sorry,
Elaine.
it's just a
Oh,
oh,
Aoife,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No,
Elaine, I'll come back to you in a minute.
Oh, I just had a comment. It was just to say thank you so much for the really clear presentations. I think the priority areas are great. And it was actually really good to see from the patient jury, citizens jury that you did on data where it was presented to and how it's kind of evolved, because it's really, really topical. It's really important work. And then to see that kind of feeding through into the genomics work as well. So I just wanted to give a comment to say really clear presentations, and I think the priority areas are really good. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Aoife. And yeah, I think Jen can testify the citizen jury work is it's really fascinating. And it's probably, you know, a sidestep for IPOSI in the sense that we traditionally always engaged with patient organizations and then a little bit with individual patient advocates, and now increasingly with a sort of health interested public, so to say. But it's really interesting to see from the report that we did last year that often these perspectives align, and more importantly, often these perspectives are able to align with other stakeholders in the area, for example, healthcare clinicians and things like that. And when that sort of collective voice begins to gather a little bit of a momentum, I think that's when we start to see change sometimes. So it's nice to see that happening. Elaine.
Yeah, so it's probably a little bit of a follow-on to Aoife's comment there, just on the citizen jury piece. I suppose, first of all, I think it looks like, it seems like a really good model in terms of capturing attitudes. You know, do we really know the patient's perspective, or do we think we know, and then we discover actually that we have a lot of preconceived ideas that are actually quite inaccurate. And I think there was one or two good examples actually in last year's with regard to, you know, patients' perception, patients' willingness to share data if they're sure that the appropriate checks and balances are in place. So, you know, that sometimes our perception of people's openness to these things can actually be wrong. I suppose my question might be, if, you know, now as you head into this year's exercise with regard to it, do you feel that you have, you know, quite a bit more momentum as a result of the work you've done last year, that perhaps, you know, there's been some credibility which has been strengthened based on the work that you did last year, and that, you know, it's easier to get that engagement from the various stakeholders, and people are really interested to see what can come out of this year's topic, because obviously it is very topical as well. So, you know, has it stepped up a level, really, I suppose, is my question.
I'll move to Jen now in a minute, but I mean, just my reaction to that is it most certainly has. Like, people are now not going, a citizen jury, citizen what? You know, they know what a citizen jury is, and they understand the value of this sort of type of deliberative mechanism for, you know, getting into tricky areas. And I think one of the things that probably is a reaction from many people, from many stakeholders to this current one that we're running at the moment is, you're running a citizen jury on genomics. That, like, people get that, people can engage with that, people, and you know, there's often a very paternalistic sort of attitude that comes from policymakers and healthcare professionals and the like, and you know, we can understand where it comes from, but people are interested and willing to engage with these really heavy and really complex topics, and you know, they kind of push back against that attitude quite forcefully.
Mm-hmm.
We are, like, Jen, you can speak to it, we're constantly amazed, aren't we, by the level that people come in at.
Oh, certainly. I mean, if you could see the amount of information that has been thrown at this group of 25 members of the public, and they absorb it and they form their thoughts, their opinions, their questions in a very short space of time. They go away and then they come back and they build on it again. And they're beginning to request more and more and more. So, I mean, I will say what wasn't included in the list of witnesses is, I sort of alluded to it, that we had unsolicited requests for people to get involved. Like, people are that aware and they realize they want to be a part of this movement or involved. So we had the Data Commission aren't a witness, but we did have somebody from their office prepare pre-recorded video because they wanted to get one thing across. Please consider this in your deliberations. We had Frances Fitzgerald, MEP, share her one thing I'd like to get across to your jurors for them to consider. We've had a clinical geneticist, Irish born but working in the States, was aware of our work. They asked to get involved. They've recorded a video. Here's one thing from me. So yeah, I would say the credibility piece is growing, and there's a movement and behind it, and very curious to see where we land once we finish this. We worked closely with Colin Henry's office, and although he wasn't ready to speak and announce the group, he gave us somebody just under him to make sure they were involved, and they're very curious to hear the outcome. So it's been great. It really has, to just see the way the roots are being.
Jen, I don't know if you'd agree, but I think one of the other things that is interesting from our observations and what might be of interest to you is that people are quite interested in engaging with the third-party industry side of things. You kind of maybe think that people shy away, or there's definitely a lot of skepticism that comes to the table, but certainly we had a very good presentation on Tuesday from an industry colleague, and I think when we ran the poll afterwards, people weren't more afraid about genomics in Ireland, and they weren't less hopeful about the future, and they weren't in complete disaster that we'd never reach a verdict with appropriate safeguards and things like that. The polls were quite good, and they were interested and they wanted to learn more. And to be honest, I'd say if we could squeeze in someone from the health insurance side of things, they'd be very interested in hearing from that side of. So there is a lot of willingness to kind of engage in dialogue across different sectors, and I think there's the opportunity to play into that a little bit. Orla.
Apologies, I missed the intros at the start. I'm the patient engagement lead in Janssen. So first of all, I'm actually back from a year's leave, and it's fantastic to see how much the team at IPOSI has expanded, and also to see how IPOSI was always fantastic for output, but the output has kind of really exponentially increased. So obviously well done on all the great work. Just about the patient education programs and their different formats. I mean, I'm just wondering, what kind of patients are you seeing coming forward? Are they patients who are already involved in patient groups? Are they just people on their own who have an interest? And I'm just wondering, how are you going about the recruitment or the kind of promotion of the various programs?
Super, Orla, really topical. Caroline, will you take us through that?
Yeah, well, for the capacity building, the new program, that's really come from the ENP, from our discussions with them. Look, could you organize a social media training? Oh, we're interested in podcasts and so on. And then we just decided, you know what, let's put that together. And actually, I have to credit, it was Derek who said, let's go beyond the members of the ENP and throw it out there to also not to duplicate. So a lot of the applications we get externally are from patient orgs. And maybe just one member would join a podcasting training and so on for us. In terms of the patient education program, then that's really advertised in a very big way from the autumn onwards and open for applications until Christmas. And that's really open to anyone who would describe themselves as either an individual patient advocate or a carer or someone who's working within a patient organization. So just to give you a feeling, we would have about 2/3 would be individual carers or advocates who wouldn't have a big patient org behind them. And about 1/3 are people who are working within the organization. Sometimes it could be an advocacy officer. It could be, for example, we had a comms officer from one of the patient orgs. It's quite a rainbow in terms of the 20 students that we end up then moving forward with. I don't know if has that really answered your question, do you think?
No, that does. I mean, it's good to hear that there is a selection or a kind of a variation in people being involved, because as kind of Joan alluded to earlier as well, you know, it's good to have people have different perspectives, and people who are from patient groups and are very involved are very different to people who are acting on their own. And I guess for us, it's great to see that there's a variety of people coming through the programs that we can then hopefully tap into. Like, we're very keen, as I'm sure all the other industry colleagues here are very keen to be working with patients more. And our issue always is being able to identify them and not exhausting our patient group partners either. So we have a very delicate balance there about how we want to do it, because we want to do it in a very responsible way as well. So it's great to hear that, you know, that pool of graduates is going to be added to, and there's a variety, very different people coming through, because that means you're not getting this very kind of small view. You're getting a much more broad view of what the patient experience is like.
I mean, Caroline, just from my interaction with them, some of them I now interact with on a regular basis, because they sit in high profile sort of PPI roles in different places. And I can think of like 5 of those that I know of anyway from the 50 are kind of people who really hadn't had any involvement in the patient organization, even health space, before the program, and like they've grown legs, I mean, legs and voices, and it's really quite amazing to see them kind of in action now. And it was nice, like at the last graduation, to kind of see those that are a bit more seasoned and kind of gotten their wings and flown, so to say, and come back and kind of share their experience with the others. So I think that bit has been really nice to see, to be honest. And I think the challenge that we do have is continuing to ensure that there's a diversity of voices in the room. I think we still have the problem of getting a certain profile, I think, and we're going to try and work with some of the different interest groups who are, you know, engaged with different communities around a variety of topics, not all health related, so to say, but we're going to try and reach out to those and see what health interests they do have and whether we can kind of incorporate any of them into our work, like especially the whole sort of patient portal, electronic health record, that sort of stuff is somewhat accessible to the average person. And so we're really going to try and do that over the coming 6 months, so to say. Joan.
Sorry, I just had a quick question, and maybe this is already something that's being done and I'm just a bit naive and ignorant to it, but so obviously you have this big, which sounds wonderful, training program for 20 people each year, and it's on my to-do list to look into it, because that sounds really interesting to me. But I'm wondering if you guys offer something that's a taster session. It's almost that introduction to patient advocacy that could be delivered to a large cohort of people by webinar or something and sent out, so that you could sort of get people's interest that maybe wouldn't apply for a 10-month course or something like that. Maybe it's something you already do.
No, you are nicely moving us on to what's going to be our section after the break, so to say. So maybe we take 2 minutes on this, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll move into kind of exactly what you're getting at. We have these big kind of modules, correct me, Caroline, 6 weeks long, 3 each, 10 weeks long, 3 each, growing in number, research ethics potentially being a new model, you know, health information potentially being another, digital health, whatever. So increasing, but not always something that each person can kind of commit to. So what Caroline is doing in the capacity building program is some of what you're talking about there: introduction to PPI, introduction to e-advocacy, introduction to social media, introduction to political campaigning, things like that. I think at the moment we've kept them to the graduates and building their capacity, but I think as we see how useful they do seem to be to those people, we need to think about expanding it out to patient organizations and maybe even more broadly to their members and things like that. So that's probably a little bit of something that we have to think about. And I think the other side of things that we're going to talk about after the break is the whole side of campaigning, and we've kind of picked health information as one of the topics that we're going to kind of trial and approach to, where we're going to have, you know, fact sheets, we're going to have social media campaigns, we're going to have patient stories, we're going to have tidbits of information that can really get people kind of engaged on the topic and get their head around some of the complicated things that are happening. So I'd say more watch this space. They're going to try and sort out some of those problems. Caroline, come in there and then we'll head to break.
Yeah, just to say that because I would do an injustice if I didn't say that Derek is ahead of the curve on most things. And so one of his ambitions is also to at least explore offering the very big content knowledge-based patient education program, 11 months. It's a big ask. It's a big ask when people have other things going on in life, especially, you know, we have people joining Zoom calls from hospital appointments, hospital beds. I mean, and so one of Derek's ambitions is maybe to look at bite-sized, or at least, you know, maybe you don't have, you know, maybe you're not at a situation where you can really sign up for a whole 11-month commitment, but you'd like just a bite-sized idea of what is that clinical trials, what is the regulation one, what's the HTA one like. So that's definitely on the to-do list. Yeah.
I love that, guys.
Lovely to hear from you that it's something, you know, we should definitely keep on the to-do list.
Having been that parent running a board meeting from Crumlin Hospital, I definitely think those bite-sized pieces, it sounds wonderful. That's exactly the type of thing that I could engage in. My time is limited and unpredictable. So I love that. Well done.
Thanks, Joan. So if there's nothing else burning at the moment, we'd move to a short break between now and maybe we convene back in 15 minutes at 11:45. And then we'll get into the whole topic of PPI training and health information.
Laura, are we going to ask people to engage in the Mentimeter during the break?
Whatever suits you, Caroline, we can do it straight away. After the break, maybe we'll throw up on screen the next slide so that people can already open it on their phones and maybe get started if they want to. It's a short questionnaire around PPI trainings, whether you've done any, whether they'd be useful for you, a couple of other questions. So feel free to get ahead of the curve, so to say. Otherwise, grab yourselves a cup of tea and we'll get back here in 11:45. Okay, thanks a million. Right, so once everyone's back, we can get started again with the second half of our meeting, where we're going to look at, I guess, interest in all things PPI, including any potential training to kind of try and get our heads around some of the tricky parts of PPI, as well as we're going to look at digital health and health information. Can we just go one slide back, Claire? Just if everyone could give me a thumbs up if they've been able to complete the Mentimeter, and otherwise I'll give just another minute or two to log on to the Menti, probably with your phone, I guess. The link is in the chat there if it's easier than typing it all out with all the little numbers, and the code is in the chat as well. Oh, there's some super organized people there who've already got it done. I'll give another just minute before we kind of formally come back, just for everyone to kind of feed into that if they can. It'll help guide how we move ahead with planning for PPI training in the future, kind of who we orientated towards in the first instance, because there's probably a couple of stakeholder groups who are kind of interested in learning a little bit more about this issue and exploring the different approaches. Okay, so Caroline, I think people have the link in the chat and the code. So if anyone needs that for reference, it's there. I don't think, Caroline, you have slides for this side of things, so to say, so we can take probably the slide deck off, and it allows us to see each other's faces again a little bit more. Sorry, I'm fluey as well. We're all a little bit bunged up here in IPOSI at the moment. So apologies for the sniffing. Caroline, over to you.
Hi, so just to maybe fill you in on a little bit of background, we had launched a SurveyMonkey survey on this, and just I honestly wasn't happy enough with the number of data points I received. But any of you who did fill it in, and actually I know that any of the people who completed my SurveyMonkey survey are on this call, so thank you. You're obviously all the top of the class students, but also we kind of learned from that in terms of the types of topics, so that, so you would have, if you looked at the survey twice, you'd see that one of the question changed. And it's interesting that I'm obviously peeking at the results there now that are coming in from you guys. I mean, not surprisingly, most people have not attended a PPI training. From my understanding, this was explained to me by one of your cohort, that a lot of that is, of course, kind of organized or controlled at a more global level, and maybe not based in Ireland. There is a low level of awareness in terms of PPI training availability in Ireland or even outside Ireland. So you're kind of split. And this is now I'm giving you kind of feedback from both survey results, which of course you'll have a compiled version of all these results after the meeting. Most of you are aware of the EUPATI training, PPI for industry and academia. So just to say a few words about that, that's run, I think, about twice a year. It's not a free training, so I think it's about €1,000 per training, and it's had been initially partially face-to-face, but obviously in the past 2 years it's been a virtual kind of half-day workshop. I'm not sure if it's run on one day or over 2 days, and it's called EUPATI Fundamentals, and there's another one called EUPATI Essentials. And in our first survey, we kind of worked off the kind of topics they were offering. It's good to see that most of you are aware of the existence of the PPI Ignite network in Ireland. Obviously, well, we are members, but the focus there, so that there's no duplication, is PPI training for research environment. So that's why we kind of wondered, is there a gap in Ireland for PPI training directed towards industry? Let me see what else. Yeah, in terms of would you be interested in a PPI training to be organized by IPOSI? I don't know if you're all being terribly polite, but overwhelmingly we got yes in both surveys. Yeah, in terms of then what interested you, what's very interesting is in the first survey, there was a leaning towards, you know, kind of the basics and the fundamentals of PPI were ranked highest. And we just threw in one there. Again, I have to give credit to Derek. He said that he really thinks that there would be an appetite for also including a kind of a mapping out of the patient advocacy landscape in Ireland, because that's something he knows, because we're not disease specific, so we have to interact with all of the players. And so he'll be delighted to see that that's ranked first today, as your main interest in a PPI training would be basically the landscape of patient advocacy. The second is identifying kind of challenges and solutions to engaging with patients. And third was, you know, just the basic principles of patient engagement. We put in a fourth option, which was other, which was, you know, maybe you know all that stuff, but you wanted something which was more topic specific. And that's where we gave you an opportunity then to kind of throw it out there, what topics are of interest. And this is my second last point. So things that are coming up is like digital health, medical devices, HTA, access to innovation, yeah, patient advocacy, self-care, that kind of thing. And in terms of the barriers, yeah, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, lack of opportunities to make contact with patients, access, yeah, to PPI partners, finding the right patient for the right PPI opportunity, resources, financial and time, and also, of course, that a lot of these things are governed externally. So maybe at that point, Laura, would be a moment just maybe for me to take a breath and just see what people feel about, you know, those results. Because, you know, to be honest, it's like the capacity building trainings and to some extent the patient education program, you know, this has to be bottom up. IPOSI will only go forth with this kind of idea if it's something that you, our industry members, are saying you want us to follow up on and use our resources to deliver this for you.
Yeah, Caroline, really good point, because if you know, I mean, if we don't put our resources into this, we can put it into something else. So
Absolutely.
it is important that it's one that would be valuable. Anyone want to come in with anything? Anyone? It's probably a bit of a naive question. Has anyone done PPI training? You guys possibly have internal PPI training programs within companies rather than having to resort to maybe external training programs. But I'd certainly be interested, Caroline, probably too, just in terms of where people are at and what they've been able to access.
So I might just say, yeah, I've had PPI training through NUI Galway, through the PPI Ignite program, but
Yes.
that was maybe 3 years ago when our project was based within the university. So at that time it was an internal program, but since then we haven't had anything formal. And I think we do feel like we would benefit now that we're in industry rather than a research project, that we would benefit from, you know, what the different considerations that entails as being an industry member rather than purely researchers, because especially from PPI contributor perspectives, we feel maybe there's a change in who they want to get involved with, because research is research, and then there's other elements that need to be considered when industry gets involved, and what is it being used for. If it's, you know, if we're benefiting from a revenue point of view from a product that they give input onto, there's just another level of considerations that we want to be transparent about as well. But we also feel like we probably could do with some training on and how to navigate that as industry members.
And are there particular elements that would be useful for training, as in, are you finding it challenging, as I think a couple mentioned earlier, in terms of identifying the patients and promoting different opportunities, or is it challenges in actually going one step behind and kind of looking at co-designing those opportunities with patients and things like that? Where do the challenges lie?
So we're in the area of palliative care, so we do I guess struggle to get we have had PPI contributors, but I suppose to the degree that we want, so that if we need to identify trends, for instance, in responses to questions we have, or you know, if when there's smaller numbers, sometimes it's hard to identify trends. And then in terms of going that one step further, when we have had PPI contributors, and you know, if they are co-designing something and there's intellectual property involved, where do we draw a line? How are we transparent? And like, anecdotally, when we've had these type of conversations with researchers or PPI contributors before, they usually don't really care about the intellectual property. They know what it is. They're saying that's not why they're contributing. But at the same time, as a company, we're not yet revenue generating, but that's not to say that when we start being revenue generating, that someone might go, okay, actually, I didn't realize that, you know, there was a potential there for me maybe to be a co-inventor, because in fairness, if they contribute to a particular aspect of medical device, they may technically be inventors. And so how are we all dealing with that and being transparent around it? You know,
and I think there's some, to speak to that point, I think there are a couple of useful tools out there around co-creating, kind of signing up to different agreements, so that all of that is kind of laying out at the start, so to say.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to come in? I look to Ruth and Orla. You guys are experienced in the PPI field, so to say. You've presumably had probably a professional backgrounds in this and lots of internal trainings. Is there any elements where you feel like there's a value to having kind of incorporated in a training? Any elements that you feel would be valuable?
Well, sorry, you're correct that, you know, can't speak for Ruth, but I'm part of a regional patient engagement network in Johnson & Johnson, Janssen, and a global as well. So we get a lot of information. You know, we sit on the EUPATI board on an EMEA level, things like that. So we get an awful lot of that kind of information and training coming down that way. From us, I think what is interesting that it came out in that poll you did as well, it's like the patient landscape in Ireland, because obviously I would have a certain perspective, but it'd be great to hear a different perspective of how it looks, because obviously I'm seeing things through a certain prism. So it'd be interesting to see what other people's perspectives are, and anything that I may have missed or don't know enough about. So I think from that point of view, I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think you covered a lot of the key things. I mean, it is an area that's of huge importance and focus to the company, I find, globally, much more so than even 4 or 5 years ago. Like there's much more emphasis on this, and getting people involved earlier and earlier in the drug development process. But I think from the Irish perspective, you know, you've kind of covered everything that would be important.
Thanks, Ruth. Anyone else want to come in?
Just out of interest, has anybody done the EUPATI fundamentals or essentials one-day training for industry and academia? Just to know if there was anybody based in Ireland that's done that. No, okay.
Okay, if there's no further comments on that, we could almost kind of, I have a bit of that cheeky niggling question that's always in the back of my head as to, you know, obviously we're kind of familiar with where the opportunities for PPI are in the medicines development process, and a lot of that happening at, you know, an international level. What always kind of is a bit of a scratch in the head to us here in IPOSI is, where are the opportunities here in Ireland in companies at the national level to involve patients? And I kind of have the assumption that they're maybe somewhat limited, but there must be some, so to say. And I guess it would be useful from my perspective here if we were to share a little bit about how you currently involve patients in your process, or where you're able to find the opportunities to involve patients in your process. It might just be a bit of a learning for everyone, if anyone would be willing to share a little bit about that. I'm going to keep calling on the people who have their cameras on, but I should really start calling on the people who don't have their cameras on.
Sorry, Laura, I just rejoined the call because I had to step out. So can you just repeat the question that you were asking? Sorry.
We were just talking, actually, just to update you, we were talking about the PPI training for industry, whether it was useful to have it. Caroline had run a little Mentimeter. I don't know if you've already had a chance to respond to the survey questions, but otherwise maybe after the meeting. But my question was now kind of moving things on a little bit. If we did feel like there was a value to having some sort of PPI training, and we look into the particular topics that you guys have now recommended, people suggested an interest in landscaping the patient advocacy, sort of mapping out the patient advocacy in Ireland would be something that would be really useful as a starting point. So if we were to start there and to do some of the other things that were mentioned, I think what we're always interested in IPOSI to know is where can we insert patients into the industry processes here at a national level. And I know that there is a challenge around it because a lot of the activity where it's natural to kind of involve patients happens elsewhere at an international level. But the question is really, where are those opportunities here nationally? And what can we be doing to facilitate greater involvement of patients? Because as Caroline mentioned, like when we look at the mapping, there is a dearth of activity in terms of involving patients in Ireland, and we would like to kind of help where we can.
I think, Laura's, for one of the areas that we would tend to involve patients is sometimes in various advisory boards. So just speaking for BioMarin here in terms, we have asked patients to be involved at international level, at global level, at the beginning of some of our clinical trials. So to ensure that, I suppose we look at clinical trials, we look at maybe some of the clinical outcomes, the quality of life outcomes that are really important to patients, and not just we're not just looking at clinical outcomes and saying, well, this is what we think is is the important outcome of a particular product, whether that's a gene therapy or something like that. The other things we may ask is around, I suppose, language and lexicon that we're using, and that sort of language is understandable, and that that it is understandable for the public, if you like. So that's where we would have some patient involvement. We also may have patient involvement in terms of, for BioMarin, we have a manufacturing facility in Ireland, and some of our products, which are particularly focused, as you know, on rare disease, are manufactured and produced there. So it's always really important for our workforce there. They really always value having either patient groups or patient representatives actually present to them, because it makes it very meaningful what they do on a daily basis. And I think on the commercial team or patient advocacy, we have a lot more contact with patient groups, and for them, they may be a little bit more distant from it. So they really always value that opportunity to, I suppose, hear from patient groups about the work that they do, and I suppose what it's like to walk in my shoes, if you like, to understand the burden of the disease and not just about the treatments. And then, so there are some of the opportunities, I suppose, that we would see. I let somebody else.
Thanks, Eleanor. Yeah, Irish representation on international advisory boards, so to say. So making sure that there's Irish representation where possible. And then kind of,
And you have to work hard at that, actually, the Irish representation.
Mm.
What I
more.
found is that we're a small country, so if you're working with global, you find that they've gone to the big countries looking for the people. Now, as it happens, the Irish patient group are very, very active, and people often say, oh God, they're fantastic in Ireland, so that's great. And once you're in, but it's a bit of work to get in the first place. I see somebody's put a question in the chat about patient advisory boards, and I would do them as well and would run them myself. And like, once you have a contract in place and you're following the guidelines, I haven't had any problem doing any patient advisory boards.
Yes, thanks.
Plus, in addition to that, Laura, when we do advisory boards and we have patient involvement, we use in BioMarin, we use a fair market value. So we do pay patients for the participation, or people for their participation, if they wish to be remunerated. Some patients or patient groups may not wish to be remunerated. That's a personal choice.
Yeah, which is really a good practice that the rest of the health sector could learn from.
Absolutely, and we do have a contract in place, obviously, as well, because sometimes it's confidential information, so we have a non-disclosure. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, one of our biggest challenges with the HSE keeps sending us through, can we have patient for this, can we have patient for that, but nobody gets paid for anything other than their travel and expenses. And I mean, sometimes it's a 1 hour meeting, but sometimes it's a 20+ hour commitment, So,
yeah, and everybody's time is valuable. It's not,
No, I mean, I think we have a previous position on remuneration, but I think it's probably time for us to revisit it and put it back out there again, because the Department of Health is doing some work around the public partners policy. So I think it's probably a little bit of time. Conscious couple of hands up now, which is great. Orla, I'll start with you, then move to Elaine and Philippa.
So I guess just your query about, getting Irish patients more involved in the kind of the global process, and it is, like to Ruth's point, it can be difficult to do because we're large organizations, and with the best will in the world, sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and it's very different. Where can be sometimes quite siloed. But I know what has worked is that we, I've actually found out that we have Irish patients sitting on global advisory boards or participating in the design of clinical trials. And I didn't know about it, but it's simply because of the local patient group here is very linked with the international patient group. So it's just a case of visibility. And I can say from Johnson & Johnson that they're crying out to have patients involved. It's very important, as I know it is for all the industry partners. So I think it's like, if we can, and to Ruth's point as well, it's kind of hard sometimes when we're the smaller country, we don't have as big a share of voice, but a big, huge USP is that we are English speaking. Yes. So I know obviously we're an English speaking organization in Johnson & Johnson, so that's a big plus. And also I can say that even at a global level and at a European level as well, they always love having the Irish patients on, and there's just something about it. They just seem to think that we have great personality or something like that, not to be patronizing, but we seem to be very good at participation, and so we do punch above our weight. So I think what would be helpful from my perspective is that if I could go back and I could say, well, this is what we have locally, and a bit more information about the patient education, or not the patient pool that's there, any patient groups who do have an interest in it and are in our therapy areas, so we can say that these are the people here, and to be able to say that they have a certain level of information and education, we can sell it in, and we, to a certain extent, and we'd be more than happy to do that, and because we're making our colleagues' lives more easy. We're
Great suggestion, Orla. Yeah, no, I mean, to put it crudely, like a bit of publicity material for showing what we're already actually doing, just maybe not getting the information out. People have so much on their plates at the moment, it's hard to get. But yeah, no, I think we'll take that on board. That's great. Elaine.
Hi, yeah. So maybe it's not quite in the industry setting, but just, I suppose, so we're a service provider to both the industry, the pharmaceutical industry typically, and also actually to the HSE. So maybe one comment is, well, I suppose on the pharma side, there's lots of people here who are extremely well versed in how these programs are designed, and what level of patient input is given at various stages. And by the time it comes to us as a service provider, there's usually people have a reasonably well developed idea of what they want their programs to look like. However, I suppose just one item, maybe slightly left of center to mention, but one of our longest standing programs actually, and it was led out, it's not out by pharma, but actually out from the HSE at the time, and it actually predates me, but it's in the rare diseases space, a very specialized patient support program at the time, where the HSE advocate who was actually launching that program, very much, the patient support group associated with that rare disease area were absolutely integral to the design of that program, involved in every step of the way. And to this day remains, because it is a HSE program, there's a retendering process every so many years, etc. That patient support group are involved and have a real share of voice with regard to, even the tender assessment piece from start to finish. So, it's sometimes, if you've got maybe a little bit before its time, actually, because this is quite a long-standing program at this stage. But we have some examples where they've been integrated into the program right from the beginning, and actually it was led out of the HSE, as it happens. It's probably our best example, actually.
Thanks, Elaine. Yes, I'm sure Derek will know more about that from his involvement in the Rare Disease Task Force and kind of following through on those issues. But thanks for sharing that example today. Yeah. Philippa and then Aoife.
Hi, I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of the meeting because I was involved in an internal PV audit. But I'm Philippa Quigley. I'm the business lead in Ireland for a company called Alnylam. For small, I'm the only one working here, but we work in rare diseases. And within our company, we have a patient ambassador program. So we would have ambassadors for each disease area and hopefully in each country. But we have an absolutely phenomenal ambassador here in Ireland who has done just Trojan work. We've worked with her for the last 2.5 years. We've helped and supported her, so she's built her own profile significantly, and she's now been included in international patient groups right across Europe and in international ad boards. She's a superb voice for the patients. She has done a lot of advocacy, reimbursement, etc. as well. And I now, only yesterday, I had a call from our global absolute head bottle washer in the US, wondering how can they bring this lady to the US to talk, because she's phenomenal in what she does and how she tells her own personal story with this disease, and her voice for other patients. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, she organized, it was her dream, and she saw through, she organized from scratch a meeting in Gweedore, like the arse end of nowhere. And she had 170 plus delegates, HCPs and patients and family members. She had international leaders, KOLs, so the two biggest names in our disease, which is hereditary AT2R amyloidosis. They came from London to speak at the meeting. They came for the weekend. They didn't charge anything. There was no flight, like not their flights, not their honoraria, nothing. And the feedback from them was that it was the best meeting they had ever attended of all their international conferences. And this one lady did all of this. She pulled it together. So I don't think we can ever underestimate the power of that patient voice, and to give them the support and the training. Within Alnylam, there is a sort of a media training and supporting them in the work that they need to help them in to find that voice, etc. But I think she would be an absolutely brilliant person for putting forward in October, when you have to call out in autumn, because I think any development we can do. But her experience has been phenomenal. She really is something else, and it's just that power of the patient voice.
Yeah, and I think that's really the message from our side, in the sense that if you can get these people through the door, they do help. I mean, and they do help you, and they have so much passion and enthusiasm, and I don't know where they get it from every day, but they do. And they have so much value and lived experience that it's really critical to try and see, how we can, when they've put up their hand and say they're willing, how we can facilitate that voice to get through. I think Orla has kind of brought me onto something that I think we just need to probably potentially within IPOSI look at how we can sometimes close the loop, because there may be Irish patient reps on different advisory boards and things like that, and some of them may come from patient organizations, but I'm sensing some of them may also be sort of individual patient advocates, and it's important for us to probably kind of close that loop up so that those people can be supported but also informed by the lived experience of as broad a community as possible, so to say. So yeah, from the conversation, I'm seeing that we've plenty of work to do, as well as yeah, the ongoing sort of effort to try and get more patients involved in industry ourselves. Any closing remarks before we move on to the next piece of this afternoon's agenda?
Hi Laura, sorry, it's
Aoife.
Aoife from Takeda. No, I just actually I'm going to echo kind of what the others have said on the call as well. So similarly, like we would have Irish patient advocates involved in kind of early trial designs, but similarly we would also maybe have those patients continue through involved in ambassador programs. So they are involved, but I just wanted to echo, I think it was Orla that said it about kind of the availability of the kind of supports that are here can help, and also help us to raise the profile of Ireland being a potential pool of people that want to be involved. Similarly, I don't know if it's just English speaking, but obviously our lovely personalities, our global team genuinely really, yeah, no, we're the crack, you know. So no, they really do genuinely love having the Irish patient voice involved, and love to hear from Irish patients and get them involved. So that's it. So if there's anything there, like a summary of kind of what supports are available, we can kind of raise that internally as well. And just to say as well, it's a similar point again, through the UK organisations, they're often connecting in that way, and then the Irish patients involved in those will kind of get involved too. So
yeah, no, I'm taking two takeaways from what we're saying here today. Kind of that I think we maybe don't do the best job that we can possibly do in terms of branding them. They're English speaking, they're European, they're educated. I mean, there are three massive big things. And so I think probably we can take away from this a little body of work to do, to kind of some promotional material to show, you know, the community that's out there, the ones that are connected with us, how people can connect with them in the first instance now, and how we hope to improve upon that in the future. So yeah, I think we can take that as way as an action for today. Okay, I think I'm going to put something in the chat, see if it works. I'm kind of multitasking here, but we'll see. It's another Menti poll, which everyone loves, I'm sure. Claire's going to put it up on the screen there as well. It'll be the next slide that pops up, but it is basically 5 questions around health information that we are just trying to gauge your interest around the topic, because just not sure what interest different people have in the subject matter. So if you take maybe the next minute, 90 seconds, I don't know how I find the results, but maybe Caroline can help me. Caroline, will they pop up on the screen, or where will I find them? Or will I wait till later until?
Yeah, so I can share the screen. That's probably the easiest. If not, if you give me a moment, I can prepare I can download it as a PDF, as you prefer.
Yeah, you can share the screen, it's grand. Yeah. Everyone, you can give me a thumbs up when you've got it done, and then I can try to, I can only see some of you in the corner, but I can try to keep an eye.
Let me know, Laura, when you want me to come off screen share, and then Caroline can share her screen.
Thanks. I think you're probably a co-host, Caroline, so probably. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Nuala. No, these are all going too fast now. Orla.
Laura, I just wanted to let Philippa know that, you know, being a Donegal woman living on the side of Slievena in Tipperary, Gweedore is not the arse end of nowhere.
The epicenter of activity.
I actually was going to say, no offense to anybody in Donegal, it was actually the most beautiful place I've ever been. It was exquisite.
Beautiful.
But it was more
Absolutely.
just for people getting there. Like one of my
Yes.
colleagues from the UK, her first flight was cancelled on Friday morning. Her second flight she missed because of the queues. And then she's flying into Belfast and she said, how would I get to Gweedore at 11 o'clock at night? And I'm like, it's 3 hours from Belfast on. Like they all thought once they landed in the north, they were there.
That's an expensive taxi.
The desire to participate that they travelled to the most beautiful corner of Ireland.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agreed. Particularly given that I'm now living in a landlocked county.
Miss the sea.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there for the moment. Anyone who didn't manage to complete it now can complete it afterwards, because I don't think it closes or whatever. Caroline, you might throw up what we briefly gathered on the screen there, just so that people can get, I can get an idea of what's going on.
Just give me one moment so I can get it in a nice
problem.
format. Okay.
We're not fussy here, don't worry. And then otherwise, Claire, in a minute or two, you can get ready to throw up the slides again, and I will run through what we've come across in the health information space over the last, let's say, 12 months or so. Now, there's a lot of activity going on at the national level, at the European level. It seems to change daily. We get different bits of information from different people, but we have been in touch with the Department of Health, the HSE, HIQA, all the rest of them, and we've gathered as much as we can together. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is to pass on as much of this information to our patient organization members, so that we can kind of get everyone on the one page, because some of them know a lot about health information, some of them know nothing about health information, some of them are highly resourced organizations, and some of them are a group of families sitting around a table. So, you know, it varies in capacity in terms of what people can take on. So we're trying to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of collecting the information, but we're also trying to do some of the heavy lifting in terms of coordinating any response or any action to the issues that are coming up. Okay, before we get into that, we'll look quickly at the survey results. In your opinion, how much access should individuals have to their health information? And we're delighted to see that we're all on the same page here, more or less complete access. Be interested to hear from the people who say partial access, and we'll move to the next one. In your opinion, how important is it that individuals share their health information for research and innovation? Very and somewhat. Interesting. Okay. Just gives us a, you know, it's not scientific, it just gives us a bit of flavor where everyone's at. Next question. In your opinion, how much do individuals understand about the benefits and risks of sharing their health information? Yeah. I mean, this is something that we would agree with, but when we ran the citizens jury, there was a lot of confidence in the room at certain points, and people felt like they knew a lot about the benefits and risks. I'm sensing that you know, when many of them completed a lot or a good deal, I'm sensing that tipped in favor of knowing a lot about the risks. I'm sensing that people don't know a lot about the benefits of sharing health information. I think there's sort of, again, a public reputation, sort of national conversation that needs to be had about why we need to share health information. Okay. In your opinion, how confident are you that companies can keep health information safe and secure from data misuse and data breaches? Very and somewhat, and that aligns with our speaker last night at the citizen jury, who kept being asked about, you know, breaches. There was something of big concern to people out there, and misuses, and whether companies were equipped for this. And he made a very good point, as I'm sure many of you would, that, you know, you have some of the best IT specialists out there with the securest systems, with serious protocols, with legal consequences. So I think the message was actually quite well received in the end. Next slide. In your opinion, how confident are you that companies can manage individual consent preferences? And I mean, here in IPOSI, we even struggle to get our heads around what those consent preferences would look like, and what the potential platforms could be, or tools could be for facilitating, you know, the regular change of these consent preferences, so to say. So that's a challenging one. I'm very confident, somewhat confident. Okay. And the last one, I think we can probably leave it. It's just an open-ended question. Anyone who wants to share anything about health information in terms of, especially in terms of how it relates to secondary use, because this is something within IPOSI that we're going to be looking at in a little bit more detail on the back of the first citizen jury, but also as developments kind of progress at the EU level. And presumably there's going to be a little bit more happening in that space in the coming 12 to 18 months. So anyone who wants to send anything can send it to me directly, research@iposi.ie. Thanks, Caroline, for that. Okay, Claire, we'll put up the slides again. And unfortunately, I will continue talking, but I can't see anyone, but if anyone wants to interrupt me to ask a question, you are more than willing to do so, and I will try my best. I am by no means a health information or health data expert, but I do come from a human rights background, and so I kind of see this topic through a certain lens as right to access and right to manage and right to edit and whatever, be in charge of your own health information. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming at from it. So what we're interested in is knowing what's important for IPOSI members. You know, we started with the patients, but we really want to know also what's important for industry and also for academia. And we also want to know what our response should be. And on some occasions that will be a patient-led response or a patient-only response. But increasingly, as I look at the space and I look at what's happening in other countries, and we look at examples of multi-stakeholder coalitions around health information in places like Canada, there's possibly the scope in a little bit of time for a joint response around this area as well. Next slide. Okay, so what are the key developments? Some of you may know a lot more about this than I do. I'm going to just pull up some notes that I had so I don't miss anything. Everyone will have seen the media articles around the upcoming legislation for health information, which is expected in the autumn. They are definitely in the process of drafting. The person who's leading out on that is Maurice O'Connor within the Department of Health. And he presented at a number of conferences recently where he says that, you know, progress is ongoing and that they really do hope to meet their autumn commitment. I'll talk a little bit more about the pillars of that legislation insofar as we are aware of them a little bit later. HICWA is also very active in the health information space. We sit on their advisory group around the consent model. This has now changed to policy considerations. So they're not calling it a consent model anymore. They're calling it recommendations for policy considerations around health information. And that's a multi-stakeholder group. There's a decent amount of patient and public representation on it. It meets quarterly and we review their draft documents. So their draft policy considerations, their draft consultation approach, things like that. There are kind of 4 key things that they're looking at. I'm not sure if I'll remember them off the top of my head. Governance, engagement, they're very strong in the engagement with patients, but also more generally with the public around this topic. So governance, engagement, technical and operational capacity. They're worried about whether the workforce can take this on, and legislation was obviously the 4th one. The other kind of piece that we're keeping an eye on is the National Children's Hospital and the implementation of the electronic health record there. The business case was approved a couple of months back to proceed with this record, and the record includes the development of a citizen portal, which this is a different way of doing things than was done for the National Maternity Record. The National Maternity Record was developed and the kind of portal was tried to be bolted on to the end of it. It wasn't foreseen in the initial proposal, but obviously maybe lessons learned, so to say, and the portal has never really been activated in the maternity side of things. So maybe lessons learned, they're going with a record and a portal. Now, anytime we ask what this portal will contain or what it will look like, the answer is a little bit fuzzy. So I think there's a lot to be worked out, and we are hoping that they will work that out with patients. We are keeping very close contact with them. They are developing a strategy for public and patient involvement in their digital work. And so we're trying to guide them a little bit as much as they can, as much as they let us.
I'm not sure if it's my connection. Did we lose Laura?
I think we might have lost her.
Okay.
I was also having some connectivity issues, so I was wondering if it was just me, but I think if it's not, we've definitely lost her. She seems to have dropped off. I'm just sending her a text now to see.
Shannon, it's Derek here. I can probably, I can probably pick things up from where Laura left off.
Yeah, that'd probably be best, because I don't know as much as her on these advocacy issues. So.
Okay, so I guess Laura has kind of outlined where the key developments are, and I guess the purpose of this is to find out really what industry members would like to see in the new legislation. So if you could just go to the next slide. So the state of affairs as to what we know about the health information bill has come from I guess a series of meetings that both Laura and myself have with the department and with the HSE, and just getting an update from them about what the aim of the bill will be, and what likely tack the heads of the bill are likely to take. And it seems to be forming around three kind of central elements, which is around the Data Guardian, which seems to be modelled on the UK Data Guardian, the Health Information Centre, which would act as that almost like a central, not so much a repository, but almost like a trusted center whereby data can be linked and interoperated and then shared. And then the third element seems to be around a rights-based approach. So there's various terms that they're using around citizen-centered and bottom-up approaches and other things. But from our point of view, those seem to be the three main, as it were, heads that the likely heads of bill will form around. So and also the in a more recent presentation by Maurice O'Connor in the department, it does seem that in terms of the learnings from the pandemic, in terms of the use of the PPSN number by the public for the vaccination program, seems to have been taken on board by the department, and any previous concerns there were by the Data Protection Commissioner's Office appear in the first instance not to be as the department doesn't seem to be as fearful of those concerns of using the PPSN above, say, the individual health identifier. So the use of and a move to PPSN as the key identifier from the public side, that seems to be the road of travel, and that the IHI will remain in place, but that will be in there from, say, the health system side. Next slide, please. So yeah, the feedback we've received from the department and the HSE is that Ireland is not likely to be able to support the development of a national electronic health record. So in any time soon, the Children's Hospital EHR will have to show its impact before that national level investment is coming down the tracks. So the focus is very much on a number of smaller, a smaller number of large-scale initiatives. So cybersecurity is definitely the priority right now, and there is moves to align ourselves with the European health data space, primarily in the area of summary care records and e-prescribing. And then certainly at the national level, the regional health areas are likely to be a large influence on this. Next slide.
Hi, Derek, I'm back. Sorry for all of
Okay.
that. The gremlins in Dublin 3.
You're okay, Laura. I'll hand back to you, and if you want to take things forward from the health data space onwards.
Yeah, sure. So you'll have heard a little bit about what's happening at the national level, and there's plenty happening, but it is probably due to what's happening, or in part due to what's happening at the EU level and some of the commitments that Ireland will have to meet going forward, especially in terms of summary care records and in terms of e-prescribing and things like that, but also in terms of large political commitments that have been made. And one of those is creating a European health data space. And that's all about facilitating the sharing of data, which perhaps GDPR put a little bit of a botch to, so to say. People got very nervous, they didn't know how to interpret it, and maybe sharing kind of slowed a little bit. So that's probably about tipping the balance a little bit back towards facilitating sharing where appropriate, where legal, where consented. And I think you can see that in the rhetoric of the Department of Health and in the rhetoric shared by the Minister, which is all around facilitating this data-enabled health environment. So I think if you guys are interested in the area, and if it's something that you want to learn a little bit more about, if you're not already keeping an eye on what's happening in terms of the joint action, that's a useful place to go. That's that, I'm not sure what the acronym is, TDIS, I think is what they call themselves. And it was established in February 2021, but they have a wealth of material on their websites. I mean, there's a number of work packages working on different things. From our perspective, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there in terms of how to build this environment where you can share health information for secondary purposes, how to involve patients and what their roles should be. So it's really worth checking out if this is something of interest to you. The European Commission has a proposal for a regulation around the health data space. The consultation is ongoing. I think it's the first week in July, so we need to get going here within IPOSI and finalize our draft response to that. We've responded to a series of sort of consultations around this in the last couple of years, but this is going to be one that we need to put something in for. I think the health data space, and generally speaking, has 3 objectives: to improve cross-border care, to unlock the potential of data sharing, and to support research and innovation. And that is called out there specifically. So it's important to have that there in the language. And we'd be hoping that similar language would be included in the legislation coming forward in the autumn. And it will be interesting to see what that language looks like and what it will actually deliver. There's a proposal to have a European Digital and Health Data Board. And this is to be established with patient representation. So it's good to see that that's up there front and center, involving patients and presumably the public, as it's an issue that kind of goes beyond the patient community and probably touches all of us, as we're all going to be likely to be patients one day and have health information that we will or will not want shared. And I guess the other important point is that there's a significant bit of funding behind building the necessary infrastructure to facilitate this data sharing. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if any Irish projects are put forward to kind of secure some of that funding. As I think somebody mentioned to us, one of the stakeholders mentioned to us previously, that might be something that's pursued. Anyway, the lasting message is that the EU is committed to having individuals access their health information by 2030. And that's something that they've signed up to as a political commitment I think when I suggested this to one of the stakeholders here in Ireland, they were like, "Well, political commitment. We'll see how we get on, you know." So we'll have to see how Ireland kind of takes that on board and how quickly they kind of run with this agenda. I think I touched upon it a little bit earlier, but what we can be doing and what we are going to be doing here within IPOSI is we're going to try and raise the level of understanding around health information among our members, specifically our patient organisation members and our individual patient advocates. And we're going to do this by developing, you know, fact sheets on what is a portal, what is a record, what is an IHI, or it'll have to be a PPSN now as well, and why are these things important, and who is doing stuff well in this space, what are the good international practices, and what are some of the additional resources if people want to know more. So that's going to be what the fact sheets kind of look like. And we're going to complement this with more accessible material that will go out in social media, be it you know, quick pieces of facts, pointers to key initiatives that are happening, key projects, be it patient stories that kind of give a little bit of the heart behind why we're so interested in this topic at all in the first place. The other thing we're going to try and do is communicate the patient and public expectations, or perspectives is probably a better word, around health information, and specifically the call that we keep getting time and time again, which is that people are not happy with just being able to view their health information, which they can't even do at the moment, but they're not happy with that being the goal. They want access to be about management and having a role, or certainly some people do at least want to have the option of having a role in how their health information is managed, and they want to be able to see an audit trail of, you know, who has accessed their health information and for what purposes, and they want to be able to withdraw, and they want to be able to add and edit, and you know, there's a lot of expectation out there, let's put it that way, and we're very keen that that is shared with people who are in key decision-making roles, you know, people who are involved in the implementation of the electronic health record, of the citizen portal, and of the broader strategy that sits around this. I'm sure Derek talked about the fact that the eHealth Ireland strategy, first developed in 2013, is going to be refreshed. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see what goes into that as well, and what the public consultation process looks like in terms of getting that strategy agreed and over the line, but also getting some sort of stakeholder buy-in into it, because I guess that's probably where we should be headed and not necessarily where we're starting from. So we will be responding, having a joint response to the draft legislation with whatever format it comes. We will be, Derek again probably mentioned it, focusing very much in on the fact that the proposal for a guardian should be supported by a public advisory panel, that the proposal for a centre should have clear governance roles for PPI representatives, and that all the conversation around rights to health information must be grounded in the person and must first of all facilitate their access to health information. So, you know, pursuing FOIs or using the Data Protection Act as a means to access your health information is no longer adequate, so to say. So we're going to be putting all of that into our various responses. We probably hope to try, now we've got a lot on for the remainder of the year, we probably hope to try and engage the patient perspective with the healthcare provider perspective, because there seems to be, at least among some parts of the community, a little bit of a meeting of minds that didn't possibly exist 5 or 10 years ago. There seems to be a little bit more sort of openness to realizing that sharing information is not the big bad thing that people see it to be, but it can really kind of help facilitate a more informed dialogue, help people take ownership for the management of their conditions, and help other secondary things like research and innovation and things like that. So we're going to try and maybe see if there's some sort of a dialogue that we can open between IPOSI member perspectives and the healthcare community. And I think the last thing here, and probably the last point I have to mention today, is that we will continue to, as we called on you guys to do earlier, champion all things PPI related. And we're going to be calling for those key roles to be established in the different parts of the health information environment or ecosystem, or whatever people want to call it these days, but to make sure that those voices are heard and that those voices are selected in a way that is transparent, so not always the same voices over and over again, and selected in a way that they are diverse. And I guess the last point that we would probably like is that it's not just always patient voices, that it will increasingly also be public voices, because this is something that really will affect younger generations a lot as you know, the health service modernizes and changes. I'll probably leave it there because I sense we've done a lot of talking, and I'm sure there is a good bit of interest in the topic. And so anyone who wants to put their hands off and kickstart the conversation, I will try and find you on my screen now.
Just a question, Laura. Will registries form part of the discussion?
I don't know if Derek is still with us. He might know a little bit more than I do about that. Registries, I haven't come across it that much in our interactions, but I might take that one away and come back to you on that one, Eleanor. Or others may know more than I do, to be honest, in that respect. But I'll come back to you with an answer on that, Eleanor. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Derek?
I could probably just say that it is very vague in terms of how registries are going to be part of this. And I guess the feedback from the department, I mean, they mention things like virtual registries, but there's no detail behind that. And then anytime that we raise the point about registries, invariably it comes down to the department to see this as being beyond just maybe patient registries, as in like the registries that would have either been established by patient groups or indeed something like the cancer registry, but it actually extends to things like you know, kind of databases and warehouses that the state actually manages. So these kind of registry type initiatives seems to be included in this. So so again, we're not able to get a definitive answer on that.
Thanks,
Derek. Ruth?
Yeah, hi, and I don't know if I heard this right, but did I hear that Ireland is not likely to be able to support an electronic health record?
A national electronic health record is not on the table for the foreseeable future.
So one for all of us is not going to happen. Is that not the basic building block?
So what the interlocutors that we spoke to said that the government, the Department of Public Expenditure, is quite simply not willing to put the money down for the upfront cost for a register, for a record. And so the Children's Hospital is the pilot, and it's going to be delivered by the time it opens in 2024, which is coming on. And thereafter, they're going to work at establishing lots, I think was the word used, or many records. And I think one of them worryingly said many portals, which was very worrying. So yeah, I think there's not a vision, to be honest, and I think part of the e-health strategy is going to have to answer that question, what the vision looks like. But at the moment, they're very much
at the European level. If they don't,
but
we don't know. Okay.
You know, I think it'll just be one of those commitments that we, you know, don't meet Renee go and fall behind.
Yeah.
Like when we look at the landscape, when we look at Ireland's progress in it, I mean, the minister himself describes us as a laggard, and you know,
yeah, it's embarrassing.
It's
really okay.
Yeah, Ruth, I guess from an IPOSI perspective, I mean, we would have been involved with the original business case that was proposed, and that was shut down because of the amount. And basically, the approach of the Office of the CIO or the HSE has been to keep continually asking the question about how do we get back to that point. And it seems that the appetite is only to support smaller initiatives rather than this national solution. So you could get into the minutiae of why the appetite doesn't exist there. And I suspect part of it is down to the quality of data that actually exists in the system. But and that there are certain building blocks that need to be in place before you go out to try and develop or try and go to tender for a national solution. So, but it will probably form part of the IPOSI submission in terms of we need national level solutions. We are not a big country. We can develop this. It's and to be honest, it's not about the technology. The technology exists. It's the willingness and the people and the capacity of the people involved is very often the obstacle.
Could you imagine how sharing would look like in that environment where citizens would have to go to multiple portals with multiple logins to find different things? So that's from a citizen point of view, but from a research and industry point of view, it's also going to be an incredible challenge to extract meaningful information from a variety. So, yeah, it'll be part of our answer, as Derek says.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what's likely to be coming down from Europe is the e-prescribing, the shared care record, which is again very top level information. It's you know, it's not even approaching anything like, say, clinical notes or anything like that. It is very, it would be it would almost be almost like a minimal viable product, you might call it, that would allow for certain information to be transferred across borders. Certainly not something that would be of immense value to somebody living with a chronic condition, shall we say.
No, and I think that message that the shared care record, while it possibly has a purpose, is not sufficient for what patients and presumably the public are calling for. I think that message will have to be strongly made when we do our submission. And I mean, even more worryingly than that, one of the interlocutors that we talked to, I mean, said, "On the shared care record, yeah. I mean, it'll be a nice to have if we get there," sort of thing. So there's a lot of battle still to be won in this space, I would say. And so with that in mind, as many voices that can get behind kind of mentioning this as many times as can possibly be done, because I think everyone has, like, as citizens, we all have a vested interest in working this problem out, never mind with our professional hats on, so to say. And it's kind of shocking the level of dialogue that exists around this. I mean, HIC was saying that this issue can't be progressed without serious public engagement, but we're talking about drafts of bill coming in less than 4 or 5 months, so there's not going to be serious engagement between. So and the HSE and Department of Health are talking about refreshing the strategy. There's not going to be serious engagement in a way that the average person on the street can engage with it. So that's why we've always felt that the citizen jury things are important. The first one was for this topic, and we're hoping that because there's now movement in the genomic space, the second one will also be for that topic too. Elaine, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, no, just a fairly specific question. Actually, you mentioned regional health areas are likely to be influential. Just how do you see that, or what do you mean by that?
Oh, Derek, you will know more about this than I do, but regional health areas are going to be set up all around the country. And the idea is that the services and the budget follow the people that live in those areas. So there's probably the fourth element, which is the information needs to follow the people that lives in those areas. So, and they need the information to be able to make budgetary and service decisions. So Derek, you can give a more coherent answer than mine. But that's...
Yeah, I think that reference is primarily in reference to capital expenditure. So the regional health areas are going to be where an awful lot of capital expenditure is going to be split, so that they're going to be responsible for their own capital expenditure. So the IT falls under, well, for digital health, you've got capital, but then you've also got revenue and you've got people. But for IT, it tends to come in under capital. So wherever the capital budget is going to be, that will actually dictate an awful lot.
But they would be authorized to go with their own individual solutions, not a national standard.
Again, this is where we're unsure as to what the national vision is, because we haven't received any kind of clarity as to what this is going to look like.
Anyone else want to come in? I must keep an eye on time as well as we go forward, but we've got a little bit of time if somebody else wants to come in.
Hi, Laura. Aoife again. I think I'm actually in a little bit of shock. Sorry, I just have to recover a little bit from some of this. But no, I suppose it was just, you touched on a little bit there around the healthcare professionals and their perspective, and that there could be alignment between what you've seen coming through in the citizens jury. And I'm just wondering, is that part of the plan? I possibly have missed this, just to capture their perspective. I'm just thinking around the 3 pillars, like the data guardianship, how much is put on to the healthcare professionals, like GPs, for example. So I'm just wondering how, what are your thoughts about bringing those in? I know you briefly mentioned it, but what would be the plan?
No, I mean, there is alignment, but there probably also is resistance. So there is the need for dialogue in this space. And I think Derek and myself, especially Derek, would know a lot of the healthcare professional champions of greater, public access to their own information, greater sharing for research and innovation and things like that. But they're possibly the lone voices, so to say, in the sense that we would like to see maybe, or certainly I'm speaking personally now at this stage, I would like to see what the institutional response is from the different associations that represent healthcare providers, because I think kind of it's time to stake their colors out there and see where they stand on this issue, so that we can kind of cobble together a shared vision around this. So in terms of what we specifically propose to do, I think we would hope to convene a virtual meeting, I would imagine, at this stage in the second half of this year. But I mean, there's a lot of moving parts around what we have to achieve and what we have on offer for the second half. So we'll see if it works. But and there has already been dialogue in this space. Derek, you attended the very interesting midwife and nursing conference there, the 20th of May, maybe, in the conference centre. Very well attended. High profile speakers from the department, opening remarks from the minister. So, they are able to grab attention in this space, and it's very important that we try and work out where the areas of consensus are, so that we can at least move those areas forward while we try and work on the rest of them. But Derek, I don't know if you want to come in there.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that healthcare professionals don't speak as one voice on this particular issue. And if you even look at the ones that are in areas that maybe we would be focused on, I mean, for the likes of the ICGP or indeed the IMO or the nursing and midwifery group, but also the pharmacies. The IPU has been really active in the digital health space and has invested a lot in their own kind of repositories and functionality. So those kind of representative groups is definitely a route to explore with. But I suspect that what this will come down to is as Laura said, is a couple of key champions within the different sectors, because and certainly what we would find in terms of our interaction would be that the clinicians, at least, who are engaged in digital health are hugely supportive of citizen-centered approaches and people getting access to their records. The more laggards in terms of digital would have that fear, and that's real. That's very real. And I'd encourage anybody to go and listen to Grania Courtney's podcast with us on talking about that. And we've got Colin Doherty lined up as well on the next podcast, and he talks about the fear as well. So really, there's no space to talk about that fear. So we would essentially look to provide that space in the first instance. I mean, we're not going to bring everybody over, but we'll at least have moved the needle in some ways in terms of at least talking about what the concerns are, because they're quite legitimate concerns at the beginning. But I think what we see from other countries is that once the right step has been taken in terms of either legislation or infrastructure, the fear dissipates quite quickly.
And some of it as well, I guess, Derek, to build upon that, in addition to fear, there's also a little bit of maybe dismissiveness or lack of priority given to it, in the sense that sometimes the healthcare professionals seem to kind of say, well, no, I mean, they don't really want that. Not every patient has the time to be going around logging into portals and seeing this, that, and the other. So there is that sort of dismissive, do we really need it sort of thing. And maybe it starts in fear, but it also kind of starts in the absence of working out what I talked about earlier, working out what the patient attitudes and perspectives are around this particular issue. So probably sharing those as much as we can.
And part of that, Laura, is as well, is that for a lot of the technology that gets developed and gets tendered, and that it's actually designed and developed with the healthcare professionals in mind as the users. So if the patients and the citizens are not identified within the tender or within whatever process is behind it, it's never going to produce something that's actually of value to them. It's always going to be seen as a kind of an add-on or nice to have. And if I'm being quite honest, the maternity newborn electronic health record is a perfect example of that. So it was only ever an add-on, the portal, and it never got implemented.
Yeah, no, I know it's a great point. It's a great point, and it's a really important point for the tenders. Actually, I haven't even thought about that from a procurement perspective, to even factor that in rather than this afterthought piece that happens afterwards, and then it doesn't always function properly. No, so it's really important, and actually, I'm just reflecting on the Citizens Jury Report, you know, and how important that is, because, you know, I've shared it with some people in these types of discussions, and it's changed their perspective, like of kind of, oh, well, actually, you know, this could be useful, you know, gone from that data guardianship, you know, fear to, okay, you know, there's real benefits here. And Laura, I think you mentioned it as well about, you know, the best practices from other countries, or kind of, you know, where other countries are. And I think that work is just even more important now.
Yeah, I mean, from our...
Great to hear you're changing minds, Aoife.
I'm not going to lie, I'm doing a course on healthcare innovation, and IPOSI's reports formed about 90% of my assignments. So,
lovely.
Somebody taking that down as impact.
Yeah, no, genuinely, we had a really robust discussion around it with healthcare professionals on that course, and it was fascinating to see their perspectives change. So, yeah, just thought I'd mention
That's great. And I mean,
made an impact.
When we're doing our digital discussions and things like that, we've often invited speakers who tend to be from the clinical community. We had them from the Netherlands, from Denmark, and from the research community in Finland. But it's always very interesting to hear their perspectives, and, you know, all of the things that we're sitting here in Ireland scratching our heads about, can it be done, whatever. They're like, technology is not the problem. You know, people are a little bit of the problem. But then, you know, progress, getting things actioned and done and starting moving and not worrying about perfection, but just getting going, all of that is kind of the bit that really puts the brakes on. So I think we're kind of suffering from a lot of that here in Ireland at the moment, unfortunately. But I would say we're at a key juncture, you know, like if this health legislation doesn't include certain elements, we're going to be stuck with it for quite a while before it's fixed. And I would say the same thing for the implementation. If the electronic health record and portal don't get certain functionality built into them, we're going to be stuck with them as models of what worked for the next little while. So it's important that we all have our voices on this one, I think. Joan, you've been waiting a long time. Come in.
Sorry, I just wanted to firstly just ask, with regard to professional organisations, have you engaged with the health and social care professionals around digital health? The reason I'm asking is that I forgot to mention, I'm also a physiotherapist, that's my background. And so we would have really robust notes, as evidenced by the low insurance costs that we incur for private insurance. And I know that I wouldn't have a problem as a clinician sharing my notes because they're clearly laid out. And I know that there's a fear in all of that stuff, but I think health and social care professionals might be good allies to have in that space. And the other thing I wanted to say is that put me in, coach, because this is like seriously the health information, the access to it. I was 14 weeks waiting for a freedom of information for my son's record to take him to a specialist Angelman syndrome clinic in Boston, and I had to delay that specialist intervention. parents are being are taking it upon themselves. There's an International Angelman Syndrome Registry. We're detailing the entire medical history of our children in this international portal because we don't have their records to share with the clinicians. Because when there's companies like you guys all here today looking to do research into rare diseases in particular, you need to know who's out there and where is their patient cohort. So it's hugely valuable to have this. And my daughter, was born in Boston, and we lived there for 2 years, and I had access to the Massachusetts General Hospital healthcare portal and the patient portal. So I've seen the value of having that. Now I must look at it again and see, does it meet all of my needs? But it was something that was novel to me to have any access to my clinician's notes and test results and appointments coming up. So yeah, I just wanted to say well done, and thank you everybody for feeding into this. And I have to say, you know, being invited as a board member to join and given all of my different backgrounds, it's been really beneficial to hear everybody's point of view today. So thank you everybody for,
Great to have
for
you here,
allowing me
Joan.
to be here.
Yep. And wouldn't it be interesting if we could have the answer to knowing whether it met your needs, the portal, and sharing it with others so that they don't make the same mistakes, or that they do
Oh, I'll
implement
have a
some of
look at it, Laura, and I'll let you know.
Great.
That's a great point, Joan. I think Laura mentioned it earlier that Shannon is going to be reimagining the iPOSI website, and one thing we're placing heavy emphasis on is stories. And I think that this is literally where we can make probably our most impact. That particularly in the data space, if we can collate stories like what you've just described there, like, you know, cancer patients having to bring their MRI results on a DVD over to the private clinic, and then realizing that it's incompatible and having to go back to the public to get a different type, and you're just kind of going, this is ridiculous. This is utterly ridiculous. And if we can harness those kinds of stories, I think that those stories are actually far more impactful for the powers that be, that are kind of trying to figure out, well, which vendor do we go with, or kind of how much this is going to cost. It's the utter ridiculousness of the current system is something that we could really highlight.
But there's massive cost savings for the health service to make in this area, because we have healthcare tourism in that you get an ambulance, you have an exacerbation COPD, that's my experience, I worked in COPD, and the closest hospital is St. Michael's Hospital where I worked, but they normally attend Tala, or they normally attend somewhere else. You're repeating chest x-rays, you're repeating all of these things that maybe they were in clinic yesterday and had a chest x-ray, but they've just popped into you. Like, there's cost savings to be made if they put the investment in now, whereby everybody has access to that information, and not just the health professionals amongst, you know, between institutions, but also, you know, the patients. You know, if a patient had access to their portal, they'd be like, there's my x-ray. Do you want to have a look at it and tell me what you think? That was done yesterday. I think it's really important work. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, no, I think somebody, I can't remember the figure, but somebody worked out if we could just have everyone pay X amount and get the record funded, I think most people would agree to pay whatever it was 50 quid or something like that for our lifetimes to have it done or something. But alas, no. If there are any final remarks, anyone wants to throw up their hand and say something, please feel free to do so on the topic. Anyone wants to share any thoughts on health information, especially for secondary use, please feel free again to get in touch with me, research@iposi.ie. We will be looking at this topic for the next 6 months in depth and doing plenty of activity around it. So do feed in. Okay, I think there's one more item on our agenda, and I'd love to let you guys go early if we could, because I realize that we've moved into, or certainly my stomach has, that we've moved into lunchtime, and everyone might like a little bit of their lunchtime back. So this was really around the benefits of having another one of these meetings. I think the timeline was probably end of year, so to say, and what people might like to talk about. What are the things that are useful to discuss together as a group of industry members, and what are useful to discuss as industry members and the iPOSI executive team, so to say. So anyone wants to be brave and take the floor and say yay or nay and a topic, feel free. Otherwise, we can continue to kind of collect that information by email too. Derek, you have persevered with us despite not feeling great. Is there anything that you wanted to share that I just haven't managed to cover over the last wee while before we kind of...
No, I mean, in terms of a possible topic, I certainly think that, well, we're going to be organizing, as part of our involvement in the Rare Disease Forum, which was previously known as the Task Force. We're going to be organizing a webinar probably in November on, well, it's primarily on rare disease medicines, but also around digital health, because you can't really have access to one without the other, really. And without any sort of digital infrastructure to be able to measure not only the effectiveness, but also where the patients are, I think rare disease medicines are always going to be behind in Ireland. So it's an area that I think a lot of our industry membership will be interested in. And to be honest, it's not just about rare diseases, but it possibly could be useful, particularly in light that they are going to be revising things like the EU regulations for the orphan drugs and also for pediatric medicines, and that another meeting around that topic towards the end of the year might actually be very useful. So even if we were to consider it, I think that there would certainly be interest among our industry members around that.
Okay, I think if there's nothing else, we can save 15 minutes in our day. And anyone who wants to send any thoughts that come to mind, as often happens to me, I'm sitting through these things and I was like, oh. So any thoughts, send it to Claire, info@iposi.ie. If it's priority area related, feel free to send it to me directly, research@iposi.ie. And otherwise we'll be in touch with probably just a short summary of what we discussed here today, as well as a potential proposal for when we might next meet and what we might discuss. And we can also feed in by email there as well. Okay, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us here today. Thanks to the staff for sharing all of the plans and all the activity that's happening, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.